thank our kind of friends who are here helping us out as vendors today. There's several lined up across the wall over here, and they're all up on the screen. Folks that are just kind of here to help and answer questions and share what knowledge that they have as well. And we'll introduce them more in detail a little later on. To get started, we're going to kind of start with what we consider our practical principles. So just some basics of how the foundation, the kind of the base of how we approach crop fertility and growing good, high quality, healthy crops with good yields. And there's many folks in the room that have been here or been at this like 30 years or more. And then I know there's a number of you that are new to us as AgriEnergy. So we'll try to kind of cover all the basics to start with, and then as we go through the day, we're going to hear from a couple of university speakers over Zoom, kind of remotely, and then this afternoon we're going to hear some growers share with us as well. So with that, we'll get started, and Ken Musselman, who's on our staff, is going to lead us off.
Well, good morning. Like Gary said, we're going to talk about some basic principles. I know some of you have been around long enough that you've heard this before, but we have a lot of new people here too. So, you know, our focus for 30 plus years has been soil health, microbiology in the soil. So soil health defines a state of soil meeting its range of ecosystem functions as appropriate to its environment, sustaining plant and animal productivity, and a state of composite well-being in terms of biological, chemical, and physical properties. And we're going to talk about those properties and management practices that help you have a healthy soil. So again, the physical, the chemical, the biological, and they all have their important components, but they all have to work together too. So whether you're moving soil or trying to change soil, the tools you use make a difference on how fast you make progress. So I'm going to start off showing the most extreme example I've ever seen of changing soil in a short period of time. These soil tests are all from the same field. This is an Amish grower in northern Kentucky. Here's this field at the start, and you know, the red bars represent very low fertility, the yellow are pretty marginal, and you know, it's a very low fertility soil. Here's the same soil a year later out in the field where he put some amendments on and some biological products, and you can see we've moved the graph a little bit. Here is the same soil a year after this, but where he had a hoop house growing organic tomatoes. So we went from very low to extremely high in 1 year. For instance, potassium, where is it up here? It's less than 200. Here it's over 900 in 1 year's time. So that's the kind of movement we're talking. Organic matter went from 2.1 to 3.5 in 1 year's time. How did he do that? Well, he knew he was going to put up a hoop house there, so he started the summer before. He told us how many manure loaders or manure spreader loads went in that area. As near as we can calculate, it was about 90 tons of manure in 4 applications within that year. 2,000 pounds of lime, 200 of potassium sulfate, 25 of magnesium sulfate, you know, the micronutrients. But then he's growing greenhouse tomatoes set up with drip tape. And during the course of the season, he put on 515 gallons of K-sulfate solution, 420 gallons of pillar, which is an organic fertilizer, 435 gallons of our SP1, which has since been replaced by MVP. Now I know that probably doesn't mean a lot to you if you're new to us, but in most row crop situations, guys are putting on between 10 and or 2 and 10 gallons per acre per year. He put on 435 during the growing season. So extremely high rate. That's what he did to get to those numbers. So, you know, he spent some money. Did he go broke doing it? He spent $6,000 an acre on fertilizer. Probably can't do that in a corn and bean rotation. But he spent $1.30 per plant. His revenue was $16.50 per plant. So he came out okay. And then he had enough fertility in the soil residual that when he grew the next crop of tomatoes the following year, he didn't have to put anything on till mid-season. So, you know, again, very dramatic change in 1 year's time. But I used to use that illustration to show you what's possible. You know, I know that's not practical if you're not growing a high-value crop like organic greenhouse tomatoes, but again, the principles that we talk about do apply. So the 3 pillars of regenerative farming, as we would determine, number 1, manage air and water and soil. And that is number 1. I get on a lot of farms, and you know what the most limiting nutrient is? It's oxygen in the soil. The soil has such poor soil structure, there's no pore space, there's no room for air. And so then nothing functions right. So we want to create the proper environment for roots and microbes by managing air and water in the soil. Secondly, we want to manage crop residues so they break down rapidly, recycle those nutrients, and they become an asset and not a detriment. And then third, manage crop fertility. Plants need nutrition to supply carbon to microbes that build soil. So not only does that proper fertility help us grow a good crop, but it's part of soil building. Tilth matters, and it matters a great deal if you're trying to farm biologically or organically. And if you're farming organically, you are farming biologically. Tilth changes a lot of things. It affects water movement in the soil. If we have a tilthy, porous soil, when we get a rain, more of it will infiltrate. But conversely, as the soil dries out, if we have good tilth, that water moves back up into the root zone by capillary action. But if we don't have good soil structure and tilth, that water remains trapped in the subsoil while our roots are up here in dry dirt. We need tilth for function of the microbes. Most of the beneficial microbes are aerobic. They need oxygen. And if we have a loose, tilthy soil, that's a good home for microbial activity. It changes nutrient use efficiency because of the activity of the microbes. So if we have healthy biology, we get much better nutrient use efficiency. And then ease of tillage is pretty easy to comprehend. If you got a loose, tilthy soil versus a tight, compacted one, it's going to take less power to pull tillage implements through. Weed control. Maybe this is one that you're not really familiar with, but a lot of weeds are triggered to germinate by the presence of gases in the soil like CO2 or methane. But if we have a loose, tilthy soil, we get gas exchange, where we get those gases out that trigger weeds to germinate, and we get oxygen in that stimulates roots and beneficial microbes. So it does impact weed control. So how do we get tilth? there's really two factors. One is flocculation, that's more of a chemical process. And then the second is aggregation, which is a biological process. A lot of microbes secrete polysaccharides. It's kind of a biological glue that takes individual soil particles and glues them together into aggregates. And that's what gives you that coffee ground crumb structure that you like to see. So which comes first? You know, tilth is largely created by biology, but yet if we don't have the structure there, how do you get the biology? So we really have to work at this, you know, simultaneously. So flocculation is a process by which clays clump together. So it's a clumping of particles. Then dispersion is the opposite of that. It's the separation of particles. So then you get into more of a structureless soil. So here shows dispersed particles. They're not attracted to each other. Here where it's flocculated, you got particles clumped together, and that's what creates pore space in the soil and allows room for air and water. So how do you get particles to flocculate? So soil aggregates are clumps of soil particles that are held closely together by moist clay, organic matter, such as roots, organic compounds formed by bacteria, fungi, and hyphae. So again, it's biological. So if we visualize it this way, a soil with pore space looks more like this stack of lumber, or a soil lacking pore space looks like this. There's no room for air or water in that stack of lumber. In real life, it looks more like this, you know, a soil that has many edges, homes for microbes within those surfaces there. So how do we flocculate a soil? You know, if we look at a soil test, most of them, a good soil test will show your cations and the percent base saturation of each one. All of those cations have some ability to flocculate clays. But here's their relative power. Sodium is a 1. Potassium slightly better at 1.7. Magnesium is much better yet at 27, but calcium is a 43. So we talk in terms of your ratio of calcium to magnesium. On most soils, we want close to a 7-to-1 ratio, at least a 4-to-1. And that's because calcium is much stronger at flocculating the soil and creating that pore space that allows the biology to flourish. So if we're lacking calcium to flocculate the soil, what do? For dry amendments, if your pH is low, high calcium lime. If you're still lacking calcium but your pH is already in that 6.4 to 6.8 range or higher, calcium lime or calcium carbonate is not very soluble, so you need gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. And most people need the sulfur anyway. We get about 30 pounds less sulfur from the air than we did several years ago as we've burned less coal and cleaned up the chimneys from coal burning too. And then liquid calcium's available that we offer. AgriBoost CA is based on calcium nitrate. That's a highly soluble calcium that can make calcium available for a short period of time, like 6 to 8 weeks. But that's enough to change the soil, flocculate it, create some tilth, get some biology in there actively. And then organically, we have the caliber. Then the Practical is like AgriBoost CA with humic and fulvic acid in it also. So that really helps to change soil tilth in that top 2 to 4 inches. We're going to look at some slides how water moves in the soil. This was done by the Washington State University Physics Department several years ago. And what we're looking at is an aquarium here with a rubber grommet inserted in the side. It's filled with soil, and then they've injected a certain amount of water into the grommet there. And what do you notice about how water moves in the soil? You know, here's the point of injection. It's moving in equal distance in all directions. So it's moving up by capillary action and down by gravity. And that's true until you hit a change in particle size or density. So here, the water isn't wanting to penetrate, going from a fine soil to a coarse soil. You'd think when it hits the coarse soil, it'd just run right through, but it doesn't. Not until we're totally saturated here. Now, most of you don't have this kind of situation, but there's a lot of fields that have this, kind of a natural plow layer, where you get an accumulation of finer particles here. And the same thing happens, that it doesn't want to penetrate that until you're totally saturated here. So if you have that situation in your field, it's kind of like a bathtub holding water there. How do you pull the plug on that? Well, somehow you have to break that up, whether it's by tillage, which is a temporary fix, or do it chemically with calcium to pull that apart. You know, here it is in the field. You see a pan there that can restrict root growth. Roots do the same thing. They tend to go down till they hit a change in density or particle size, and that can turn roots so they grow laterally. So here's one solution. We got a corn plant growing over here. Where the knife is, that's pretty tight soil. But he'd run some deep aeration over here with a subsoiler or a knife, some kind of deep tillage. So the roots go over the top of the compacted area, hit this loose soil, and then they keep going down. So that's a way to temporarily break up that plow pan and yet get roots into the subsoil. And when you do that, those roots will tend to hold that channel open longer. So we're maintaining the benefit of tillage over a longer period of time. So what you don't want to happen when it turns off dry is to have all your roots here and your moisture down here. So in this scenario, you're able to access this. But I think you'll also see, if you can create this, you got kind of a zone of updraft for moisture here that will wick moisture back up into the root zone too. So again, it has to do with soil tilth and structure. So how does soil tilth affect crop development? You know, here's an ideal situation. The roots are growing unrestricted, they're deep, they're going down at the proper angle. We know that the soil biology is very active because there's soil clinging to these roots. So that's a sign of good active biology. So your soil tilth is working in favor of the crop. Here's just the opposite. We're looking at the bottom side of a corn root. I dug that out in western Iowa several years ago. He no-tilled corn into alfalfa. The trouble is it was too wet when he no-tilled, so he had a mohawk from the planter, and this just happens to be one that found a crack going across the row. But he had corn there that had been side dressed with anhydrous ammonia, growing after alfalfa that was nitrogen deficient. That shouldn't be, but because the soil structure was so poor, the roots couldn't access the nitrogen that was there.
So now we'll switch gears a little bit and consider biology and the role that biology plays in this whole thing of our soil and tilth and structure and fertility. This particular handout we made a number of years ago and created, and they're back in the corner on the literature table. you're certainly welcome to get one of those and read that in a little more detail. So when we talk about biology, we're thinking about all those critters that are out there in the soil. And as it says, there's a lot happening out there. Of course, there's bigger critters like the nematodes and arthropods and stuff like that. And then there's a lot of really smaller ones. So our bacteria and fungi and stuff like that. So when we talk about microbes or microbiology, that's really what we're talking about, is the bacteria and the fungi. So we'll look into that a little bit. This chart's kind of hard to look at or complicated, but essentially the whole idea is that every one of these functions that happens out in the soil, carbon cycling, N fixation, soil structure relating to breaking down organic matter or breaking down residue and creating organic matter, as it goes into plant growth, disease suppression, plant nutrient availability, nutrient cycling is a term that we'll use. All those things all relate to the biology out there in the soil. And if we take away nothing else from that, it's just that our biology matters. It affects everything else that we do out there, and then the end result of that plant and the yield and the quality that we get. When we think about microbial communities, there's a number of factors that influence that, and they influence not only the number of organisms out there, but the diversity. So do we have all the different kinds of beneficials that we really want? And that's both food, nutrients, which part of that is our fertility out there that we'll talk about. Then also environmental conditions, temperature, the pH makeup of the soil, amount of air in the soil, as Ken was talking about, moisture movement, water movement through the soil, all those factors. But what it comes down to is microbes are found in every type of land, water, environment, in our cells, in our livestock, they're everywhere. So how can we use them to kind of maximize the benefits, the positives that we get out of it? When we talk about growing crops, we really want to think about the rhizosphere. So that's the area around the roots of the plant. So, and that's where the majority or the vast number of those beneficial organisms are living that are going to benefit our crop and benefit our plant, is in that root zone, in that rhizosphere right around those roots. They're really heavily influenced by root secretions. So the term is rhizodeposition. But to me, it's just the roots are giving off a lot of, whether it's sugars, whether it's enzymes, other things that are stimulating and feeding the biology. And it works in a kind of symbiotic relationship. The plants give off stuff that help the biology, and the biology does things that then help the plants. So we want to encourage that kind of, those working in tandem and helping each other out. And there we talk about here, exudates is another term for it. Sugars, carbohydrates, amino acids, polysaccharides, enzymes, all those beneficial things. So then we think, well, if biology is good, well, then we want to build it, right? We want more of it. We want good biology. So what can we do to help that? How do we build our soil biology? So first of all, using cultural practices that promote or are friendly to our microbes. And we're not saying that just in a kind of traditional no-till versus tillage type thing that you might hear, but really it's how to create that ideal environment out there in the soil for those microbes to flourish. And as some of the things that Ken was talking about with air and water moving in the soil and creating tilth and having good structure of that soil, that all works into that. Then we want to do things to feed them. So we want them to grow and to multiply and to go through their life cycles and do other functions and make all that work. So we're feeding them using sugars, carbons, actual fertilizer. They feed on phosphates and all kinds of things that are in our fertilizers. Growing cover crops, this picture on the right, having a growing plant out there at the same time that we're breaking down crop residue. It's kind of the ideal situation. So we have both carbon out there, and then we also have a plant that's giving off those sugars and exudates and feeding the organisms, making all of that work. Our actual cash crop, the crop that we're growing, and we'll use the term in a minute that there's no substitute for building your soil than having a good, healthy, high-yielding crop out there. And then finally, residue management, which Ken is going to talk about in a few minutes. We can make that as efficient as possible. And then finally, we really believe an important part is inoculating with additional microbes. So not just relying on the ones that are out there in our field already, but adding specific microbes at particular times to do a certain job, and just overall building up that diversity in a kind of continual manner that makes it most successful. We want to keep that crop, a crop out there growing as much as possible. And that's where the cover crops really fit in a lot with this whole idea. Or rotating with perennial crops, so our hays and our pastures and different things like that. But the more we can keep active roots out there growing in that soil as opposed to bare soil, then that's going to keep giving more food and being a home for the microbes and allow them to flourish and work longer through the season. They say that 30 to 60% of the net photosynthesis is allocated to the roots. So as that plant starts growing and starts functioning, it's using a lot of its energy to put down into those roots. And then to put out these exudates, these sugars and things, out through those roots. So one way to have a healthy biology out in our soil is to have a healthy, functioning, growing plant out there. And it says an appreciable amount is released as organic carbon into the rhizosphere. So it's those roots that are giving off all those compounds, putting them into the soil, that's then helping build the soil and increase the microbes. One of the products that we use is called MVP, and that has just a diverse kind of collection or diverse number of all beneficial organisms, and it's primarily bacteria with some fungi, but we like to use this anytime that we're trying to grow a plant, because all these organisms are beneficial and helpful in getting that plant growing. So we use that at planting, and then we kind of come, which I'll mention in a minute, use something else on the seed, and there's a role for rhizobium out there. These are all different ways of getting biology microbes into our program and using them in a way that's going to be helpful to us, beneficial. So with the MVP, we like to think of it as supercharging the rhizosphere. And these are all, tiny little bugs, but they can make a big difference when they're out there in that soil and around that plant. So we're trying to stimulate the plant to grow more roots. Again, that's this relationship that they have. The more we help the plant, the more that feeds the biology. Well, the more we put biology around those roots, the more that helps the plant. So it goes back and forth. The plant roots then produce more exudates. The exudates feed the microbes, and that whole cycle just keeps going and going that way. When we think about our seed, we like to put something called mycoseed treat on the seed. That's mycorrhiza fungi along with a beneficial bacterial package. The mycorrhiza fungi are kind of specific to planting and putting on the seed, as those are is a fungal organism that essentially grows with that new seedling as it sprouts and the roots start to grow, and then it has hyphae, or kind of stringy things that reach out and they grab phosphorus, they grab water, they grab other nutrients, kind of as an extension of the plant, of the root, that helps bring more nutrients and water into the roots and that. So, and for one of the kind of simplest, most inexpensive things a person can do is get some biology right with that seed when you plant and helping get it off to a good start. There's a shot of some roots there. The ones on the left had the seed treatment, and the ones on the right not as much, and you see the length. And we don't look just for more necessarily massive roots, but is there more fine roots? Is there a lot more soil like clinging to those roots? That's rhizosphere. We can grow that. and get more fine root hairs on the roots, as well as a nice root structure. There's a plot of corn from years ago. It was about 12 bushel, 11.5 bushel better. We see that a lot. If we do that, there's a plot with Bex on beans a number of years ago, 4 to 5 bushel better. We know if we can get biology right on that seed, get it off to a good start, a healthy start, a better start, that pays off for the whole life of that plant and ultimately with yield at the end. One thing we see a lot with small grains or hay planting, hay seedings, pasture seedings, different stuff like that, is they say, well, the whole field just came up more evenly. Can we get all those seeds to sprout and to come up at the same rate, all at the same time? That's where we really ultimately have the best stand and then the best yield out of that. And the biology can help do that. Another one that we're working with the last couple of years now called EcoVam. It's a similar type package, only that it's water soluble. So this can go in with like a liquid in furrow kind of thing, or it can be put into a liquid for transplants in a greenhouse, different ways to put it on. But again, it's getting that mycorrhiza fungi and other good bacteria right around that seed at planting, so it gets off to a good start. This was grass out in Oregon, where they put the EcoVam on, and the top ones were treated and the bottom ones were not. And just in the early life of that plant, how can we get more root mass, more aggressively growing roots? The roots are putting out the exudates, and the biology's helping the plant, and it's all working together. Rhizobium, that's a kind of a different kind of bug, but those are important to legumes. And a lot of you probably work with these already, but just a reminder that it's always a good investment, good thing to put with legume plants. And these guys produce the nodules on the roots, which those nodules then help create and provide the plant with nitrogen, as well as when that plant breaks down, providing nitrogen there for the next crop. So we think always a good practice to incorporate that. Excuse me. One that we like, that we've worked with now for a couple years, this is there's different versions. With the organic folks, we work with the peat products an awful lot because they're natural. Now this is a liquid that's organic that can go on soybeans, and they have it for pea vetch as well. But we source a number of different rhizobium products and can help you all with that. Then we think about endophytes. So those are organisms that live within the plant. So not now what's in the soil, but what's actually in the plant. And as we get to foliar feeding, then that becomes a bigger kind of thing to focus on, is how can we get the best, excuse me, the most kind of complete, diverse active microbial population in that plant. So big role there is in the nitrogen fixation, organisms that fix nitrogen, and then synthesizing hormones, here it says, the various cytokinins, gibberellins, and you get into the hormone thing, and that can be a whole nother talk, on what all those do. But the bottom line is we want our biology to make all those functions, all those systems in the plant really work well. Then helping nutrients flow through the plant, whether that's flowing up from the roots, and then the conversion processes, all those things, helping that to happen. And then just plain helping the plant grow. How do we get a bigger plant, a healthy plant, everything functioning well? Well, it takes those organisms, like in that plant itself, to make all that happen. A big thing there is what we call nutrient cycling. So that is, it's not creating nutrients, it has to get them from somewhere. So the bugs, the organisms, they help the nutrients, whether it's nutrients in the soil that the roots are then taking up, the biology, the organisms are helping that that plant to cycle that nutrient so it's in the right form that the plant can use and the plant makes available. There's kind of two terms that go with this mineralization. So that's converting nutrients from inaccessible forms to mineral or usable forms. Big thing we think of there is a nitrogen cycle. So you can have organic forms of nitrogen like in the soil that the plant cannot utilize at that point, but then the organisms then convert the nitrogen into the ammonia, into the nitrates, make all those things happen to the forms that the plant needs then. And then the other term there is immobilization. So that's tying up nutrients in the cells of the microbes, so then that reduces the leaching or the loss of those nutrients. So they're kind of two opposite jobs that they're doing. Oh yeah, they're making nutrients available to the plant, but then they're also tying up the nutrients, right? Hanging on to them. So they seem contrary, but actually in reality they work together because the microbes are helping that plant as well as what they're doing in the soil, making both of those jobs happen at the same time. And that's what we need. We need nutrients to be available to the plant so it can use it. Then we also need our soil and our plant to hang on to things to where it needs it later and can use it later. Ken was talking about soil structure and tilth, and the organisms play a big role in that, helping create that crumb structure, that nice structure out there. I think it's fair to say that if you don't have good active biology in the soil, it's really hard to get tilth and then keep tilth there. You may create it for a short period of time, but then, you get a whole bunch of rain, you get things that happen, you do tillage, all that, and then it destroys that again. So if we have healthy active biology out there, then that helps maintain that tilth and keep creating good tilth as environmental things, want to take. It's kind of like the taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. There's things that happen to us out there, but then we always want to keep working on our soils to move them forward as well. The biology really helps to do that. This was a kind of a little test you can do that fellow we worked with from Northeast Ohio kind of came up with this idea, and they call it the drop test. So you take a shovel and you dig out a big chunk of soil and you hold that up, and then if you're on whether it's a hard flat part of the soil or on the road or something like that, just take that chunk of soil and drop it and see what happens. Does it like the left? Does it break up just into several big pieces, like big clods or chunks? Or when you drop it, does it, like on the lower right, turn into more of a crumb structure and break up kind of nice and even and consistent in that? And that's what we call having tilth, if it does that. If we can't do that, well, then we got clods, right? We got chunks, and we need to work on that. And that's where some of these principles can really help us in that fashion. This is a shot, and Ken kind of showed this a little bit earlier, but here they're combining the idea of using the airway, or a tool similar to that, where you're just getting some incorporation of the residues with the soil, getting a little bit of air into the soil, trying to create pore space. And then we're putting with that, this is the residues product for breaking down residue, putting that in the soil, so creating the pore space and then filling it with biology. So as we do things physically or chemically to make our soil structure better, at the same time, we want to add biology. We want to put biology in that same soil, those same spaces. And that's how we can then help not only create the tilth, but help keep it from there. We said this earlier, the best way to build soil is to grow healthy plants, for them to be well fertilized. And that's part of having a healthy plant, is having the right adequate fertilizer and making sure it gets what it needs. And then inoculating with microbes, and a diversity of microbes. So that's why we're taking the approach of using a couple of different products at different times in order to do different jobs out there. And the whole sum of that is building that diversity in the soil. And we shouldn't underestimate the power of a healthy plant to build its own soil. If we can keep a plant really growing and healthy and growing a lot of roots, then working with the microbes in the soil, the roots and the microbes, are building that soil. To switch gears just a little bit, and I'm going to hand it over to Clint to talk about this. A 3-week-old corn plant has put 40% of its dry matter production out its roots. So in the first several weeks of that plant's life, it's putting, the bulk or a big chunk of its energy into growing roots, into getting started. And Clint Wietrich, he's our local guy here. He's a couple miles down the road. But he's on staff with us as well as has a local dealership. And Clint's going to talk about some of the ideas of starters and things you can do early in that plant's life to really help get it going.
Hey, Gary?
Yes.
On your airway,
Yeah.
was that?
It's an old picture,
Was that done in the fall or before corn planting?
Ken, you want to? I'll go back.
That was done in the fall. And I'm not sure if they no-tilled, it was in bean stubble. I don't know if they no-tilled or ran a field cultivator.
And then the residues was applied
With the
before?
airway,
Right with the airway.
yeah. One trip.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Appreciate you all taking your time to be here today, and I know everybody always has a lot going on, so thank you. Okay, I'm just going to give a short little presentation. We're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to start with the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship. It's really important to have the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place. And that's in a perfect world, right? I mean, nothing ever goes wrong when you're out in the field. Don't get rain when you're supposed to go out there. So it's difficult to do, but that's what we got to strive for. So how can we do this, and how can we do it economically? Banding fertilizer has proven to be very efficient, economical, and raise your ROI. What it will do, it will cut your fertility expense by half, and it's 2 times as efficient as broadcast. So what we recommend is take that savings, instead of broadcasting it across your entire field, get that where it's supposed to be, when it's supposed to be there through banding. And also another thing, that will feed your crop and not the weeds. So we all have a weed issue, especially the organic farmers, so anything we can do to suppress that issue and suppress weed pressure, the better off we are. This is an illustration of banding compared, so basically what that's showing us is you get your fertilizer out there. If you're banding it, deep banding it, you're using quite a bit less, and it's all being used by the plant. And you can band in several different fashions, whether it's in furrow, 2x2, quite a few different methods. So one thing that we have observed over the years is the value of starters. Starter shines in low soil temps. Here's an illustration of the soil temperature and the percent availability of phosphates. Early spring, every year is a little bit different, especially, we have some in here from farther north, we have some from all over the country really that I see here. Especially up north, the soil temperature is a really big deal. Getting that to the right temperature before you plant so the phosphates are available is very important. Early on in a plant's life, especially corn and beans, phosphorus is very, very important, but yet not readily available generally if the soil temperature is not there. And And so that's why it's really important to band with starter, because that is going to be readily available in the format that the plant needs. So the roots will be right there to be able to grab onto that. It won't have to extract it from the soil as much because we'll be feeding it with the correct nutrients. One thing that we have also observed is the importance of adding biology. So in furrow, we have quite a few different products, but MVP, it really shines when it's in furrow because it's right there, right where the plant needs it, right by the seed. And it will really help build your root ball. 421-4, that's a blend that we use in furrow. We have a couple different blends. We can customize them as well. That is for conventional. You'll notice the FOS is quite a bit higher than the N and K, and that's for a reason that basically early on in the plant life, excuse me, it is needing quite a bit more FOS. PKT blend is organic certified blend. Now if you do 2x2, we also add MVP in there as well, but we have something called a starter blend that has a few more traces added to it. Basically, if you go in furrow, there are certain micronutrients that you don't want to put right near the seed. It can be very harmful, such as boron. But if you go a little bit out of this in furrow, like in a 2x2, then you can start adding, your sulfurs, your boron, things like that, in a little bit higher doses. Pillar is organic certified product, and 202 is also organic certified. This here is an in-furrow application from Southern Illinois from a few years ago. You can see there it was the blend was 5 gallons of 421-4, so this was a conventional farm. Added a ½ gallon of traces and 3 gallons of SP1, which is now MVP. We've improved that formula over the years. That yielded 291.2 bushel. There was also a check, you'll see there. We didn't add the starter, and the yield was 239.2. I would say that paid. Okay, this here is from a plot at JDS Seeds. I had the opportunity to visit this plot about 3 times this past growing season. He does a phenomenal job, and I always enjoy getting to visit him, and I always learn something every time I go as well. So this here is just a few, he has quite a few plots, but this is one plot where compared no starters with starters, and you can see there that the yield netted about 11.4 bushel higher than the no starter. He has been farming biologically for decades, so his soil it's very similar to this type of soil in this area. It's clay. If it's not alive with biology, then it tends to get very compacted. He doesn't necessarily have those issues because he has been farming biologically for so many years. So those are pretty good yields for that area. We also added Blue N. That's a foliar product. It is organic certified as well. What that is, it's an N fixer. It's a set of microbes. We did not see too much of a gain there this year on that. One reason that we think that is because it wasn't, it had adequate nitrogen already. That's not, so where we have seen that shine is where if turns off dry, when it turns off dry, sometimes the nutrients are not readily available through the soil. So you kind of give it that kickstart. And that is an endophyte, so it actually lives within the plant. So after you put it on foliarly, It'll actually live within the plant through the life of the plant.
If I may make a comment there,
Yes.
that was a fairly low population plot. And because of that, the ears were filled to the tip. There just wasn't any room to get additional yield. Had he had 32,000, we would have probably seen a yield increase. So that's not, I recorded it because that's what we had. But I think it's important that we recognize where we can use it to our advantage and where it may not help us.
Yes. And beautiful ears, by the way, right there's a picture of them. He also has quite a few different varieties, and this is all non-GMO as well, on an Amish farm. So the starter program, with that net difference of 11.4 bushel, you can kind of see down there, it was 2-gallon MVP, KT pack, DRAMO, which is a fish product. There's several different versions of that. And MST was applied to all plots. And then the blue end, the rate of that is 5 ounces an acre, and that's pretty much the standard rate. And that was applied at V6. This here was a trial, just a picture of the ear. Does anybody notice any differences with this? Does it look different to anybody? A little bit. And that was just 1 gallon in furrow and 1 gallon broadcast difference of SP1, which is now MVP. So that created a pretty significant difference just for 2 gallons throughout the season of MVP. Gary, do you know what field that was in? Where that was from? Do you remember?
That was research, I think, that was done out in Pennsylvania, right, Dean? If I'm not mistaken.
It's very possible, I don't recall that.
Yeah, it's from a number of years ago. But just the whole idea that just biology is helping make that ear bigger and better, so.
And that was the only difference, was the MVP or the SP1. There's quite a few other sources of banding. There's surface band, strip till, side dress, stream applications, and full ears. The whole idea of banding, again, is getting the nutrients that you need, when you need them, and where you need them. This here is a SJ3, I believe, nozzle. Another form of banding there. Basically, it's a stream application. Here is the alfalfa program that had a stream application on it. You can see there 2-gallon MVP, 4-gallon of K-Pack, 8-gallon KTS, 28%. If alfalfa is thin, liquid calcium. Calcium is something that I've observed to be pretty important and is often overlooked in many programs. And I think one reason for that could be it doesn't play nice with like phosphorus, for instance. If you ever mix those two together, try it in a little jar test if you never have when you get home, and let me know what you come up with. It'll be like curdled milk and it happens instantaneously. So please don't put that together or else you'll be pretty mad at us. And then also if you're organic, like chicken litter and gypsum, especially around here in these clay soils, really helps flocculate the soil. It's a good calcium source as well as a sulfur source. And what that will do, and you can apply that pretty much anytime throughout the year, probably like right now even. A lot of times, especially on the clay, we like to see about 500 pounds or so, depending on your soluble levels of calcium. That's the other thing about gypsum, is it is very soluble. So once you put it on, it will move through the soil profile, and it will be readily available for the plant. So it doesn't have to. Here's a sample soybean program. That was, we stream applied at R1. Again, it was 2-gallon MVP, some AgriBoost PK, KTS, ATS, and depending on your K and nitrogen levels, sometimes, you know, the ATS could be better in some cases, or KTS. There's also sometimes a pretty significant price difference. So sometimes that will help you determine which one may be best as well. There's about 3/4 gallon of biohumus. Humics are very important as well. We like to add those at the right time and the right place as well. Really helps get everything else going as well, including the MVP with the biological life. And boron. So this program netted about 15 bushel an acre on soybeans, which is, can definitely pay. Organic soybeans, over the last year or two, the prices have been extremely good. And we have seen quite a few of these programs pay out very well. So the ROI was definitely there. And it's not just about the ROI, it's about being a good steward. You're not only making money for that growing season, but you're investing in your soil bank. You're going to get paid dividends year over year over year if we do, you know, apply good stewardship in our practices. Side dress, that's another form of banding. I'm sure most here have side dressed before. What I've often seen is most people, or not most, but many farmers, their standard practice tend to only put nitrogen in side dress. The plant is actually hungry for quite a few nutrients at that point of its life. And it's not just nitrogen. Yes, nitrogen is a key component and very, very important, but it's all about a balance. Later on in the plant's life, most plants require a lot of potassium, sulfur, boron. Boron is very important. I kind of think of that as it kind of helps determine the capacity that plant is able to hold and uptake. Carbon, very, very important. We hear that all the time in mainstream. And MVP, that's the biological package. If you haven't noticed kind of the commonality, we like to add MVP anytime we go out on the field, especially when you're banding it, because you're getting very concentrated amounts of those good microbes and readily available. Foliar feeding, that's another form. When do you want to foliar feed? Well, if the plant's telling you something, generally we'll foliar, you know, it depends, but there's early season foliars, late season foliars. But if you're visibly seeing a deficiency at that point, I don't want to say it's too late, but we're a little bit behind the 8 ball. You can, you know, if you're walking your fields, which we like to do with all of our customers every year, is walk the fields, we go dig up some roots. We kind of look at the root structure. We look at the overall health of the plant, the integrity of the plant. And if that is telling us something, then the sooner you can get out there and meet that deficiency, whatever it may be, the better off you are, and the less impact it will have on your overall yield. If the plant is under stress, last year I think most farms experience this. Oftentimes we do. I mean, every year there's some sort of distress that your plants will encounter. However, this year was a little bit different, I feel like, which tends to be the going rate the last couple of years. I think overall, just the environment's changed a little bit. The weather patterns have changed a little bit. So they encounter a lot of stress. Well, every day that plant is under stress, that's costing yield and plant health. So whatever we can do to meet its needs without it going through a day of stress, the better off, the more happy everybody is, right? The happier your plant is, the happier you are when you're out there harvesting. So if you're trying to push growth, that's another good opportunity to get out there and do a foliar. It's not all about rescuing your plant. Sometimes it's boosting your plant as well. And oftentimes, like I did mention, if you're noticing a deficiency, you may want to get out there sooner than later because it's already costing you. pH problems in the soil, that can cause a lot of issues. So sometimes if the pH is not where it needs to be, it can lock up certain nutrients. And everything needs to work synergistically in the soil. In my opinion, the good Lord created everything perfectly, and the closest that we can get to grow and treat the land and our crops to how He designed it, the better off we are. One of those things is the pH balance. This here shows sorry about that. The speed of a foliar applied nutrient uptake. This is done by the University of Nebraska. And what this is showing us is how many minutes after application and the percent of uptake. So if you look at that chart, right after you're applying your foliar, seems to be when a majority of that is getting taken into the plant. And another thing you'll notice is it's not just all nutrients are going to be absorbed by that plant when it goes onto the leaf. Excuse me. So again, it's a balance. There's NPK, you got iron, manganese, zinc. So depending on what that plant is needing is the mix that you should apply. And we are also able to assist with that. We do custom blends. So that's another thing that, if you take soil samples or plant tissue analysis and it's showing a deficiency in a certain micronutrient, we can add that if it plays nice and ship it all together. Saves you a lot of time in mixing. Yes, sir.
Is there a preferred time of day for foliar feed?
So research has shown early in the morning or late in the evening. And especially like this year, so there were some really hot, dry days. That plant, when it is encountering stress at those peak times of the heat of the day, tend to go dormant, okay? So the stomata are not as active, which that's what allows the plant to absorb those nutrients. Now, if that plant and the stomata are dormant, they're not looking to take in stuff. So it's much more effective of all the research that I've seen to do it at the right time of day. Also, another thing, if you're adding biology to that, there are certain times that, like when the sun is really hot, those biologicals, when you add them to your foliar, it's going to help the plant absorb some, but again, if the stress is there, it's really going to negate you're not going to get the full benefits. Thank you. So we have AgriEnergy Plus. That's a new product that we have this year. It's a new blend. It's a 3-5-15 product. We are using an acetate form of potassium. And the reason we're using acetate form is if you look at the chart to the right, that is the most readily available form. Okay, this is a conventional product. We do have organic certified products as well, but this is only for conventional. But if you look at the difference there, you're getting more bang out of your buck, okay? Because it is right there ready. The plant is ready to use it immediately. And in that, we also, because generally foliars are done, you can do early foliars, but it's going to, we added sulfur, boron, manganese, and zinc, which are, we can add other things to it as well, but those tend to be the common micronutrients that are needed in and we see deficiencies of pretty often. All right, well, thank you everybody for your time. Ken's going to be talking next.
So, we want to maximize our efficiency by spoon feeding the crop through the season, closer to when the plant needs it, getting biology out there like we've talked, and that does increase the nutrient use efficiency. So 3 practices to build carbon in the soil. Keep a crop growing as much as possible. And again, it's the root exudates coming off of a living root growing in the soil that's feeding the biology. And we think that's how soil builds the quickest, is just by having biology on an active root. 2 is recycle residues to replace carbohydrates. We're going to talk more about that. And then proper tillage. What is proper tillage? There's a lot of factors that go into that. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It depends on your soil type, your climate, how far north you are, how fast residue tends to decompose, the slope of the soil, what's the previous crop, what's the next crop. So there's a whole lot of factors. So again, cover crops allow you to keep a living root in the soil, feeding biology more days out of the year. We're capturing photosynthesis energy from the sun and converting it into biology and building soil. So we want to talk about recycling residues. This is a picture of the AgriEnergy farm here several years ago. There's the south border. This is one neighbor's field here. This is a second. You see there's a color difference there. Why is that? It's due to the higher organic matter, even though these fields have had basically the same tillage and the same crop rotation for years. But the main difference is how residue was handled and then adding biological products in the springtime. So in a 180 bushel corn crop, which is pretty modest by today's standards, there's 80 pounds of nitrogen, 30 pounds of phosphate, and 190 of potassium in the above ground portion of that residue. So if we can get that to break down rapidly, we can recycle those nutrients to feed the next crop. Plus there's also sulfur, calcium, and magnesium, and other micronutrients. So what is good residue management? One, we want to till plant residue into the aerobic zone, or at least get it in contact with the soil. For the most part, the microbes that decompose residue don't live on the residue, they live in the soil. Generally, most times there's not enough moisture to sustain them on the residue alone. So that residue has to be at least in contact with the soil. We say here, till it into the aerobic zone. The aerobic zone, again, is that soil with oxygen in it. That's where your crumb structure is. Once you get below that, you get into a tighter anaerobic soil. And if you put your plant residue down there, it's not going to break down properly. We want to narrow the carbon to nitrogen ratio just like you would in a compost pile. We can do that with livestock manure, green manure crops, things like that. And then we want to avoid using excess nitrogen. Organic matter has a 10-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. If we put up too much nitrogen, the microbes are going to burn carbon to get back to that ratio. So it's hard to build soil using excessive rates of nitrogen. What are the benefits of good residue management? Improved soil tilth. Again, we talked about how it takes an army of microbes to break down crop residue, and they secrete polysaccharides that soil particles together and create that crumb structure. So if we have rapid decomposition, improved soil tilth is the natural outcome. With improved soil tilth, we get a better seed bed. We have less weed pressure, again, because the soil can breathe. We're not trapping gases that cause weeds to germinate. We break down phytotoxic compounds. You know, maybe in some cases that's herbicides or pesticides, but there's also phytotoxic compounds just from breaking down residue. So we want that process out of the way before we start to grow the next crop. Less immobilization of nutrients or tie-up. You know, the microbes are going to eat first. So we want the bulk of that decomposition done before we're trying to grow the next crop, and we'll have more availability of nutrients. That gives us a faster start for the next crop, gives us a better chance or opportunity to capture maximum yields. So, how do we treat our residue? We want to inoculate it to accelerate the plant residue breakdown, putting organisms out there that do decompose residue, fungi and bacteria both. That can be done on cash crops or cover crops. The Residue WS is the product we use. That's a dry water-soluble powder. In most situations, it goes on at 1/10 of a pound per acre. That has the microbes in it that speed up the decomposition. But we want to put some kind of a food source with it, a sugar, a fish, a humic acid, something to jumpstart that process, get the microbes multiplying so they then go to work on the residue. So ideally, we'd spray this product on as soon as possible after harvest to give us more days of warm soil temperatures to break the residue down. I know in a lot of cases it just doesn't happen in the fall. Harvest gets pushed back and we're already into, cooler soil temperatures. So in that case, a lot of guys put it on in the spring at the first opportunity. And then the proper tillage to incorporate it. Again, what is proper tillage? It varies, anything from something not very aggressive like an airway to a disc ripper, or again, depending on your situation. But get it in contact with the soil. This is a picture I took several years ago of Valparaiso, Indiana. This is a no-tiller. He uses the airway here, applies the residues in one trip. Here he had 4 point rows that he didn't want to go back to the other end of the field and just to pick up 4 rows. And so he left them untreated, didn't get the residues or the airway. And almost missed this. We were been looking at crops and we're ready to call it quits. He said, there's a spot out in this field you might be interested in. And so we got to looking there, and you see without the residues, there's quite a few corn stalks left. Over here, they're pretty well gone. Here you'll see clods. Here you have nice, loose, crumbly soil. So again, if we speed up decomposition, we do change the soil tilth. Another thing that doesn't show up real well, there's a little bit of yellow on the edges of some of these leaves. There's some potassium deficiency there, which you don't see over here. So again, we've broken that crop residue down. We're recycling those nutrients. There's more potassium available for this bean crop over here. Just a factor on how tillage can impact water movement in the soil. Again, slide from Washington State University. Here we've got straw incorporated uniformly throughout the profile, and the water wicks down. Here it would be like turning it under with a moldboard plow, so you've got a matter residue. That inhibits water movement down through the profile. Here would be like a mini moldboard plow where you're laying the residue in vertical strips. And that actually enhances, especially if that strip of residue goes clear to the surface, it enhances the water infiltration. So again, you can see the line here on that AgriEnergy farm. So with permission from the neighbors, we tested that and found that we had 1% more organic matter in the top 6 inches of soil than the neighboring farms, same soil type, same tillage practices and crop history. What does that mean, having 1% more organic matter? That means we're storing another 1,000 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Is all that available to grow the next crop? No, but a percentage of it is. Generally, from 1%, you'll get anywhere from 20 to 40 units of nitrogen each year from your organic matter. You're also storing another 651 pounds of phosphate, 115 pounds of potash, 728 pounds of calcium, plus more water holding capacity, 83,000 pounds of water. So you're going to be able to weather dry spells more if we can build our organic matter. What does that really mean on the long term? This is kind of a summary from nitrogen rate plots we did on the AgriEnergy farm back in the 90s and comparing it to nitrogen rate plots that the University of Illinois did at the same time. We found on the biological program on that farm, it took 0.37 pounds of nitrogen to grow a bushel of corn after soybeans. The University of Illinois found that the most economical rate was 0.95 pounds of nitrogen. If we go to corn after corn, we're about 0.6 pounds of nitrogen to grow a bushel of corn on a biological program. And, you know, for years and years, Illinois said it takes 1.2 bushels of 1.2 pounds of nitrogen to grow a bushel of corn. And that's what their study showed. And a little less if you give a credit for after soybeans. So it's taking considerably less purchased nitrogen to grow a bushel of corn. You know, here's a field of corn on the farm following soybeans. It had 35 pounds of nitrogen applied at planting time, and that was over 200 bushel corn. Another savings is phosphorus. You know, we're getting more phosphorus from the soil. The most phosphorus that farm got for 30 years was typically about 5 gallons of a starter. We're assuming every year, it wasn't in corn every year, so it didn't always get that much. If you figure that over a 28-year period, you grow 200 bushel corn, each bushel removes 0.43 pounds of phosphorus. So this is how much phosphorus was removed from grain from the farm. This is how much was applied, 420. So we have a deficit of almost 1 ton of phosphate per acre. So man, we must have really tanked our phosphorus levels on the soil test, right? Well, in 1981, the P1 level was 190. In 2009, it was 190. So again, we're getting available phosphorus from biology in the soil and building organic matter. So that's a huge opportunity to save money on input costs. So again, with P2O5, how can I use less and build levels? Phosphate solubilizing organisms like we have in the MVP, banned, use reduced rates, feed the crop, not let it tie up on the soil. Mycorrhizal fungi that break phosphorus loose, like the mycoseed tree. Grow more biomass, a better root system, and then manage residue and recycle those nutrients. So what are the benefits of biological farming? Better tilth, increasing organic matter, which means darkening soils. When that happens, weatherproof, whether we get too much rain or too little, we're going to do better if we have more organic matter in our soils. Reduced nitrogen and phosphorus inputs. We're growing higher quality, more nutrients dense. So corn that stores better. If you're growing produce, it's going to store better. Forages, we're going to have a higher quality product, and then better yields also.
For helping share this morning.